Video games seem to love combat. We don't just have action, we have first and third person shooters, we have fighting games and brawlers, hack and slash and action RPG, arena brawlers and more. Other artistic mediums, like cinema, have action genres too. These are movies that are defined by combat, when the fighting is crucial to the message. But defining video games by whether they contain combat would be far too broad a category to be useful. Fighting in video games means more than fighting in other mediums, and it is rarely combat for the sake of it. The fighting is almost always there to reinforce a deeper message. Take Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice for example. It is a game about dealing with high-functioning psychosis. People who suffer from this condition may indeed tell you that they have to fight with their condition every day, but very rarely do they mean that literally. It's the paranoia, the fear of losing touch with reality, and so on and so forth. And yet, this game that had actual psychologists working as consultants still thought that combat was crucial to its design. Mirror's Edge is a game about freerunning. So why is that constantly interrupted by combat sequences? Evidently, combat is so powerful a tool that developers can't resist including it in their games. Let's drill down a bit further. Before we answer why combat is so crucial to so many games, let's first ask, what is combat for? All drama is conflict and resolution. Will the heroes... The problem every writer has to face is what type of conflict best shoulders the theme and message they are trying to portray, and how to represent that. Take for example, The Last of Us. Okay, The Last of Us 2. One of the conflicts trying to be represented is the struggle to survive at all costs. Will Ellie... Will she prevail, or will she die to the hands of zombies or cultists? At the beginning of each encounter, you start with extremely limited resources. As you scramble through this sequence, you expend, recover, and slap together new weapons in a wonderful chaotic scramble to survive. Your inventory is a ship of Theseus, constantly being spent and replaced. You are left with wonderful ludonarrative harmony. Ellie finds herself rifling through her bag, slamming tape and scraps and scissors together in a hurry before the next enemy spots her. And you, the player, are frantically tearing through menus, performing each crafting recipe. And when it comes to the execution, everything is animated with the same level of rawness and chaos. Zooming out though, frantic gameplay like this brings you closer to the character in a very physical sense. As you start to panic and your fingers move faster, you start to make mistakes, ratcheting up the tension. Much like real combat, small mistakes cause grievous injuries in real fighting, and each one increases the likelihood of the next. The fact that games can simulate this feeling brings you closer to the character in a way that other mediums simply cannot match. But why combat? Well, it's not just combat, that much is obvious. There are plenty of games where you don't so much as raise a fist at someone. But it is disproportionately represented compared to other artistic mediums. I believe this is down to three main reasons: clarity, expression, and a shared struggle. The first and most obvious point is clarity. Physical combat is about the clearest way that you can represent conflict. The danger and stakes are the most obvious when the characters' lives are literally being decided in a fight. In Katana Zero, you play as the drug addict samurai Zero. He is plagued by nightmares, anxious episodes, and trauma. Ostensibly, Zero fights to get paid so he can fuel his addiction. In reality, he fights to stave off the darkness. The senseless violence is less horrific than his own mind. The combat in this game serves as the clearest way to represent that struggle. After each screen you are greeted with the words, "Yes, that will do." The fighting was a satisfactory catharsis for Zero. He is literally and figuratively battling his way through his trauma, a dangerous coping mechanism. In Mirror's Edge, this clarity is used towards lazy ends. The game is at its best when you are leaping from rooftop to rooftop, never slowing down for a second. The combat is terribly realized, boiling down to one action you repeat for every enemy. You are a runner. You run. And yet, the game forces you to walk right up to heavily armed police officers, wait for them to hit you, at which point you disarm them. Why do they do this? Because it cements the idea that you are against the police. This is lazy game design. The problem of how do we portray this conflict was solved with combat because it makes it impossible to miss the meaning. Faith and the police are enemies. But imagine what Mirror's Edge could have been like if you were sprinting across high-rises and through offices, dodging spotlights from helicopters, and finessing your way around blockades. The conflict between the totalitarian society and faith would be equally portrayed, but more in harmony with the gameplay. Combat is a powerful storytelling device for clarity, but it can also be a crutch. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice uses combat as a means of expression. The way that Senua fights is a manifestation of her anger and fear mixed into a chaotic cocktail of emotion. Senua is superhumanly strong, throwing aside the heavy maces of behemoths with ease. This is metaphor at work. She is not fighting anything in reality, but her mind, and thus the combat, believes that she is up against terrifying foes, expressions of her own mental state. And thus she imagines herself as being immensely strong, because it is the only thing that gives her hope. It is the last shred of agency she can ascribe to herself. And yet, the combat in this game is not a power fantasy. She is strong, but not strong enough. She is constantly overwhelmed by enemies, her own mind working to destroy her. They come at her from all angles, and the voices in her mind frequently chastise her for not being strong enough. So what is the purpose of this contradiction? The combat is trying to illustrate that Senua is extremely brave for facing the ordeal that she does, and in order to face that ordeal she must be incredibly strong. But that does not make her a superhero. She is not powerful. In fact, she constantly feels weak and exhausted. She does not suffer the fate that she does because she is a hero. She suffers because she has no choice. This message is so drastically different from the majority of games on the market, and thus the specific game feel is different too. But it still uses combat to speak its message, and to great effect. Finally, combat forces a much deeper connection between the character and the player through a shared struggle. Again, this is true of the majority of pillars of gameplay, but combat is once again the clearest way of depicting that. Souls-like games pull this off wonderfully. The thesis statement of the Dark Souls world is about rising against an oppressive world. Every element of the game reflects this. Those familiar with the lore of Dark Souls will know that the entire journey you go on to Length of Fire, thus prolonging this Age of Fire, is actually an elaborate deception to keep the humans under the thumb of the gods. The gods are oppressing you. Additionally, when you look at the world around you, it is utterly dead. The atmosphere is oppressive, and you find that you are oppressed by the very combat that is your only agency. The game is difficult, this you know, but it is difficult for the purpose of reinforcing this thesis statement. The best artworks evoke their message in every way that they can. Masterpieces are dripping with their themes and force you, however obviously or subtly, to confront their message. The combat system of Dark Souls reinforces its themes beautifully. The opposite of oppression is freedom, and there is none of that in the combat of Soulsborne games. There is little to no animation cancelling. Once you hit the attack button, you must commit fully to that attack. On top of this, you have to reason with a stamina bar and a slow and vulnerable healing process. The way that you fight is not freeing in any way. You feel utterly chained to your foe. The result of this is perfect ludonarrative harmony. The narrative, the theming, the environment, and the gameplay all reinforce the idea that you are fighting against powers bigger than you that want to keep you down. At the end of the day, this is a video game though, and video games require that you give the players agency. Otherwise, it's just a movie. Agency is usually the most freeing thing you can give someone, and so the gameplay is made to be equally oppressive. The combat ties you to the struggle of your character and the struggle of the world of Dark Souls. While fighting, you are battling against yourself primarily, and your enemy second. Your biggest enemies are getting greedy and running out of stamina, or panicking and dodging imprecisely. In Dark Souls,
you'll face death. Enough death to leave you broken. Time after time.
This shared struggle places you much more firmly into the world. In Spec Ops: The Line, the fighting you do is far more horrific. The Line is a game that is explicitly about war crimes, and so combat was inevitable from the outset. Overall, I think that the narrative is rather clumsy, but it managed to hit home with what it made you do. The problem with many games that are concerned with morality is that you are forced to do terrible things, and then the game patronizes you for doing exactly what it told you to do. This is true too in Spec Ops. That feeling of being tricked is the intended effect. The war-torn Dubai that you find yourself in is the protagonist Martin Walker's personal purgatory. The whole game is about his attempts to do good, only to be betrayed and sabotaged by people he trusted, and the way that his mistakes lead to the deaths of countless innocent people. This tears Walker apart. He is racked with guilt, he feels utterly tricked. He is doing what he can to get his unit out of Dubai and to save people, but as every order that he makes him more and more of an irredeemable monster. An anti-hero is a bad person that can be counted on to do the right thing, but Walker is an anti-villain, a normal person who can be counted on at every twist and turn to do the wrong, evil thing. As a player, that means that when you fire the white phosphorus missile at the enemy, you find out only minutes later that they were civilians. Lesser games use this moment to chastise you and call you evil. Spec Ops simply ask you to turn this frustration and anger that you have for doing the wrong thing, for being tricked into doing the wrong thing, and turn it towards Walker. You understand the pain and the regret and the sin because you both did the crime. You are forced to struggle through it together. So, we have the intense physical ludonarrative harmony between hitting buttons and hitting enemies. Combat reinforces struggle. There is the clarity of message it brings, the expression and emotion, and finally the way it makes you connect with your character by means of a shared struggle. Combat is one of the most dramatic and tense actions in life, with each micro moment increasing the tension of the next. Games are the only medium capable of physically simulating that, not just on the screen, but on your keyboard or controller. It truly forces you to connect with the character and feel their tension and fear or their power fantasy. It also gets you to interact with the game's deeper themes by getting you to experience each moment on multiple levels. It is the opposite of passive. You cannot ignore what the game is trying to say to you while in the midst of combat. It demands your attention and your action. And it is for these reasons that combat is so crucial to the design of so many video games. Thanks for watching and sticking with me for my second video. If you like this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And most importantly, share it with a friend. I'd be very grateful. See you next time and look forward to more videos from me.